Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Call. Craig Stevens had always prided himself on reading people. 20 years as a criminal investigator with the State Bureau of Investigation had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. Even now, 5 years into his private security consulting business, he could spot deception from across a crowded room. But nothing had prepared him for the terror in his 8-year-old daughter's voice that Tuesday evening. He was reviewing case files in his home office when his cell phone rang. The caller ID showed Emma's number, the emergency phone they'd given her for situations exactly like sleepovers at Aunt Cassie's house. "Hey, sweetheart," Craig answered warmly. "Having fun with Aunt Cassie and Uncle Dan. Daddy, help. Come get me now." Emma's voice was strangled with panic, barely above a whisper. Craig's blood turned to ice. His daughter had never sounded like this, not even during her worst nightmares. "Emma, what's wrong? Calm down and tell Daddy what's happening. Auntie and Uncle are doing things to me that I can't say." The words came out in a terrified rush. "Please, Daddy, I'm scared." The line went dead. Craig stared at the phone for exactly 2 seconds before his training kicked in. He was already moving toward the stairs, shouting for his wife. "Christina, we need to go. Now." Christina Stevens appeared at the top of the stairs, her auburn hair still damp from the shower. One look at her husband's face told her everything she needed to know. In their 15 years of marriage, she'd seen Craig handle armed suspects, death threats, and corrupt politicians with unwavering composure. She'd never seen him look like this. "Emma," she whispered. "Get in the car," Craig said, his voice deadly calm. "I'll explain on the way." As Christina threw on clothes, Craig's mind raced through possibilities. Dan Woodard had married Christina's younger sister, Cassie, 3 years ago. Craig had never liked the man. There was something off about his too-perfect smile and the way his eyes never quite met yours when he spoke. But Cassie was head over heels, and Christina had begged Craig to give her new brother-in-law a chance. Craig grabbed his service weapon from the gun safe, checked the magazine, and secured it in his shoulder holster. Old habits died hard, and right now, he was grateful for every single one of them. The drive to Cassie's house normally took 40 minutes. Craig made it in 25, running red lights, and pushing his BMW to its limits while Christina called Emma's number repeatedly. Each ring that went unanswered felt like a knife twisting in his chest. "Tell me exactly what she said," Christina demanded, her voice shaking. Craig recounted the conversation word for word, his investigator's memory serving him perfectly. Christina's face grew paler with each detail. "Dan's been so good with Emma," she whispered. "He always volunteers to babysit, takes her to the park." "Oh God, Craig, what if—" "Don't," Craig cut her off. "We don't know anything yet, but we're going to find out." They pulled into the driveway of the modest 2-story house at 9:47 p.m. Every light was on, which struck Craig as odd. He'd expected them to be asleep by now, or at least settling down for the night. Craig approached the front door with Christina close behind. Before he could knock, Cassie opened it, her face flushed and her smile too bright. "Craig, Christina, what a surprise. What brings you by so late?" "We're here for Emma," Craig said, his eyes scanning past Cassie into the house. "She called us." "Oh, she must have been having a nightmare," Cassie said quickly. "You know how kids are with sleepovers." "She's fine now, though. Already back asleep." Everything about Cassie's demeanor screamed deception. Her hands were shaking, her pupils dilated, and she kept glancing over her shoulder as if waiting for someone to appear. "I'd like to see her," Craig said. It wasn't a request. "Well, she's sleeping, and you know how cranky she gets when she's woken up." "Cassie," Christina stepped forward. "Where's my daughter?" Before Cassie could answer, Dan appeared behind her. Craig's trained eye immediately cataloged the man's appearance. Disheveled clothing, flushed face, and a thin sheen of sweat despite the cool evening air. "Hey there, folks," Dan said with his trademark grin. "Emma's having such a good time. Hate to cut the sleepover short. She called us," Craig said, his voice level. "She was scared. Kids and their imaginations, right?" Dan chuckled, but Craig caught the slight tremor in his voice. "She probably had a bad dream and got confused. You know how it is. Craig stepped closer, using his 6'2" frame to full advantage. Dan was shorter, softer, the kind of man who'd never been in a real fight. "I'd like to speak with my daughter." Now, the tension in the air was palpable. Christina moved to support her husband, while Cassie seemed to shrink into herself. "Of course," Dan said finally. "She's upstairs. I'll get her." "We'll come with you," Craig said. As they climbed the stairs, Craig's mind was working overtime. Dan's body language, Cassie's nervous energy, the way they both kept glancing at each other. Everything pointed to a situation spiraling out of control, and Emma was at the center of it. They found Emma in the guest room, sitting on the bed in her pajamas. The moment she saw her parents, she launched herself into Craig's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "Daddy, I want to go home. Please take me home." Craig held his daughter close, feeling her small body trembling against his chest. Over her head, he met Dan's eyes and saw something that made his blood run cold. Not embarrassment or confusion, but calculation. Dan was already working out his next move. "Thank you for having her," Christina said coldly, gathering Emma's things. "We'll be going now." As they prepared to leave, Craig lingered in the doorway, studying Dan's face. 20 years of interrogation experience had taught him to read micro-expressions, and what he saw confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. "Craig," Dan called as they headed for the car. "I hope there's no misunderstanding here. Emma's always welcome in our home." Craig turned back slowly. "There's no misunderstanding, Dan. None at all." The drive home was tense. Emma fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from her ordeal, while Christina peppered Craig with whispered questions he couldn't yet answer. Back home, they tucked Emma into her own bed, and Craig waited until he was sure she was asleep before joining Christina in their bedroom. "What do we do now?" Christina asked. Craig was already reaching for his laptop. Now we find out exactly who Dan Woodard really is. Chapter 2, Revelations. Craig spent the next 3 days conducting the most thorough background investigation of his career. What he discovered made his stomach turn and his hands clench into fists. Daniel Marcus Woodard, age 34, had a carefully constructed identity that fell apart under serious scrutiny. His employment history showed gaps that didn't add up, references that led to disconnected phone numbers, and educational credentials that couldn't be verified. More disturbing were the patterns Craig uncovered. Over the past decade, Dan had lived in 4 different states, always leaving abruptly after 18 to 24 months. In each location, there had been whispered allegations involving children. Nothing that stuck, nothing officially reported, but consistent enough to form a clear picture. Craig's contacts in law enforcement were invaluable. Detective Warren Young from the Riverside Police Department owed Craig a favor from his bureau days, and he wasn't shy about sharing what he knew. "Your brother-in-law's name has come up in our files twice in the past year," Warren told Craig over coffee at a diner downtown. Both times involving inappropriate contact with minors at the community center where he volunteers. "Why wasn't he arrested?" Craig demanded. Warren's expression darkened. "Because both times, the family suddenly decided not to press charges. Both times, they received anonymous donations to their children's college funds. Both times, they moved out of state within 6 months." The pieces were falling into place, and Craig didn't like the picture they were forming. Dan wasn't just a predator. He was a sophisticated one with resources and connections. "There's something else," Warren continued. "Dan's got friends in high places. Judge Patrick Nelson plays poker with him twice a month. District Attorney Ernest Chung's wife works at the charity where Dan volunteers. This guy's been building a network of protection." Craig's phone buzzed with a text from Christina. "Emma's therapist wants to see us both. Today, 4 p.m. Dr. Agnes Koch was a child psychologist with 30 years of experience. Her office was warm and inviting, but her expression was grim as she met with Craig and Christina. "I've had 2 sessions with Emma," she began. "She's exhibiting classic signs of sexual trauma. Nightmares, regression in behavior, fear of being alone with adult men, and most telling, age-inappropriate knowledge about sexual acts." Christina's face went white. Craig felt his world tilt on its axis. Emma described specific incidents. Dr. Koch continued gently. She's consistent in her details, and her emotional responses are genuine. In my professional opinion, she was sexually abused during her stay at your sister's house. The words hit Craig like physical blows. His 8-year-old daughter, his baby girl, had been violated by a man he'd allowed into their lives. "What's our next step?" Craig asked, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "Report it to the authorities," Dr. Koch said. "I'm mandated to do so regardless, but having parental support makes the process easier for Emma." That evening, Craig and Christina met with Detective Marty Jones from the Special Victims Unit. Jones was thorough and compassionate, but Craig could see the writing on the wall before they'd even finished giving their statement. "Mr. Stevens," Jones said carefully, "I want you to know we take these allegations very seriously. But I have to be honest with you about the challenges we're facing, such as Emma's age makes her testimony complicated. Defense attorneys will claim she was coached or confused. We have no physical evidence, and the only witnesses are Dan and Cassie, who will obviously deny everything." Craig's jaw tightened. "So what are you telling me?" "I'm telling you that even if we arrest Dan Woodard, and that's a big if, there's a good chance he'll walk. And given his connections in this town, there's an even better chance this case gets buried before it reaches trial." That night, Craig couldn't sleep. He stood in Emma's doorway, watching his daughter toss and turn, calling out for him in her dreams. The system that had been his life's work was failing his family when they needed it most. He made a decision that would change everything. Craig returned to his office and began making phone calls. His network of contacts extended far beyond local law enforcement. He called in favors, shared information, and slowly began assembling a picture of Dan Woodard's true identity and network of protection. Joseph Burton, a federal investigator Craig had worked with years ago, provided the breakthrough. "Your guy isn't working alone," Burton told him during a secure video call. "We've been tracking a network of wealthy individuals involved in child exploitation. They provide financial support and legal protection in exchange for services. Dan Woodard's name appears in encrypted communications we intercepted 6 months ago." Craig felt his blood run cold. "How many others?" "At least a dozen in your state alone. Judges, politicians, business leaders. They've been operating with impunity for years because they protect each other." The conversation continued for another hour, with Burton sharing details that made Craig's stomach churn. Emma wasn't Dan's first victim. She was part of a much larger pattern of abuse and exploitation. When Craig finally hung up, he sat in silence for a long time. The system wouldn't give his family justice. The law couldn't touch these people. But Craig wasn't bound by the same rules anymore. He opened his laptop and began typing. If the authorities wouldn't stop Dan Woodard and his network, Craig would do it himself. And he knew exactly where to start. Chapter 3: The System Fails. 2 weeks later, Craig's worst fears were confirmed. Despite Dr. Koch's testimony and Emma's brave statements to Detective Jones, the district attorney's office declined to press charges against Dan Woodard. Craig sat across from Assistant District Attorney Felipe Gibbons, struggling to maintain his composure as the man delivered what amounted to a death sentence for justice. "The evidence is circumstantial," Gibbons said with practiced indifference. "A child's testimony, no physical evidence, no corroborating witnesses. Any competent defense attorney would tear our case apart." "My daughter was raped," Craig said through gritted teeth. "She's 8 years old. She's in therapy because of what that animal did to her. I understand your frustration, Mr. Stevens, but I have to consider what I can prove in court, not just what I believe happened." Craig leaned forward. "What if I told you Dan Woodard is part of a larger network? That there are other victims, other families who've been silenced?" Gibbons's expression didn't change. "Do you have evidence of this network? Names, documentation, financial records?" Craig had plenty of evidence, thanks to Joseph Burton's investigation. But sharing it would compromise an ongoing federal operation and potentially destroy any chance of bringing down the entire network. "I have credible intelligence." "Intelligence isn't evidence, Mr. Stevens. Bring me something I can use in court and we'll talk." Walking out of the DA's office, Craig felt 20 years of faith in the justice system crumble around him. He dedicated his career to the belief that good ultimately triumphed over evil, that the system, however flawed, would protect the innocent. He'd been naive. That afternoon brought another devastating blow. Christina met him at home with tears in her eyes and legal papers in her hands. "Cassie filed for a restraining order," she said, "against both of us. She's claiming we're harassing her and Dan, that we're making false accusations to break up their marriage." Craig scanned the documents. Judge Patrick Nelson, Dan's poker buddy, had signed the order. It prohibited Craig and Christina from contacting Dan or Cassie, coming within 500 feet of their home, or discussing the allegations with anyone in their social circle. "They're isolating us," Craig realized, "making us look like the unstable ones." The phone rang. It was Dr. Koch. "I wanted to let you know that I received a call from the state licensing board," she said carefully. "Someone filed a complaint about my treatment of Emma, claiming I coerced her testimony. I'm under investigation." Craig closed his eyes. The network was moving fast, using their influence to neutralize anyone who might support Emma's case. "Doctor, I want you to know." "Mr. Stevens," she interrupted gently, "I've been doing this for 30 years. I know what I saw, and I know what Emma told me. No investigation is going to change that. But I wanted you to understand what you're up against." After hanging up, Craig looked at his wife and daughter. Emma was coloring at the kitchen table, but she flinched every time a car drove past their house. Christina's eyes were red from crying, and she'd lost weight from the stress. They were all victims now. Craig made his decision that night. He called Warren Young and arranged a meeting at a secluded location outside town. "I need your help," Craig told his old friend as they sat in Young's patrol car overlooking the river. "Not as a cop, as a friend." Warren studied Craig's face in the dim light. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking the system has failed my family. I'm thinking Dan Woodard and his friends believe they're untouchable. And I'm thinking it's time someone proved them wrong." "Craig, you're talking about vigilante justice. That's not you." "The man who believed in the system isn't me anymore," Craig replied. "He died the day I realized his daughter's rapist would never see the inside of a courtroom." Warren was quiet for a long moment. "What do you need?" Over the next hour, Craig outlined his plan. It was audacious, dangerous, and completely illegal. It would require Warren to risk his career and Craig to abandon everything he'd once stood for. "This could destroy us both," Warren warned. "Dan Woodard destroyed my family," Craig said. "I'm just returning the favor." The next morning, Craig began laying the groundwork for Dan's destruction. He started by visiting Tyrone Clayton, a private investigator who specialized in divorce cases and had a reputation for bending rules when the situation warranted it. "I need everything on Dan Woodard," Craig told him. "His real history, his financial records, his connections, his weaknesses. Everything." Clayton studied the photos and documents Craig provided. "This is going to be expensive and dangerous. Men with this kind of protection don't go down easy." "Money's no object," Craig said. "And as for danger, I'm counting on it." While Clayton began his investigation, Craig reached out to another old contact, Emmanuel Christian, a computer specialist who'd left the Bureau under less than ideal circumstances but retained his skills and his resentment toward authority. "I need digital surveillance," Craig explained during their meeting in a crowded mall food court. "Phone records, email accounts, banking information. Can you do it without leaving traces?" Emmanuel's smile was predatory. "For the right price, I can make it look like Dan Woodard is investigating himself." Craig's final recruitment was the most important. Alfred Moore had been his partner during his last 3 years with the Bureau, before taking early retirement after a corruption scandal that had never quite been resolved. Alfred had always operated in gray areas, and Craig suspected he'd be amenable to a project that existed outside the boundaries of law. They met at Alfred's cabin in the mountains, 30 miles from the nearest neighbor. "You want to destroy a pedophile ring," Alfred said after Craig laid out everything he knew. "Can't say I'm opposed to the concept. It's not just about justice," Craig admitted. "It's about revenge. I want Dan Woodard to suffer the way my daughter has suffered. I wanted to know what it feels like to be helpless and afraid." Alfred poured himself another whiskey and considered. "You know this makes us criminals. The law didn't protect Emma. Maybe criminals can." Alfred raised his glass. to crimes of conscience. By the end of the week, Craig had assembled his team and begun the preliminary phases of his plan. Dan Woodard thought he was untouchable, protected by his network of powerful friends. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Chapter 4. Building the Case. 6 weeks after Emma's assault, Craig's underground investigation had transformed him into someone even he didn't recognize. The methodical, by-the-book investigator had been replaced by a man driven by a single purpose: Dan Woodard's complete destruction. Tyrone Clayton's research had uncovered disturbing patterns spanning 2 decades. Dan's real name was Daniel Marcus Slaughter, and he'd been using variations of his identity to evade detection across multiple states. "Your boy's got a system," Clayton reported during their weekly meeting at an abandoned warehouse Craig had rented for operational security. "He targets families with young children, insinuates himself into their communities, grooms his victims for months before making his move." The files Clayton spread across the makeshift conference table painted a horrifying picture. Police reports that had been buried, families who'd been threatened into silence, and a paper trail of financial payoffs that led back to a network of wealthy individuals. "How many victims?" Craig asked, though he dreaded the answer. "That I can prove? 14 children over the past 8 years. But I suspect there are more. Many more." Emmanuel Christian's digital surveillance had been equally productive. From his mobile command center, a modified van filled with state-of-the-art hacking equipment, he'd penetrated Dan's electronic communications and discovered a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. "He's sloppy with his digital security," Emmanuel explained, showing Craig encrypted chat logs on his laptop screen. "Uses the same password for everything. Clicks on phishing emails. Never updates his software. For a criminal, he's remarkably stupid about technology." The chat logs revealed Dan's connections to his network of protectors. Judge Patrick Nelson provided legal immunity in exchange for access to Dan's victims. District Attorney Ernest Chung buried investigations that got too close to the truth. Business leader Gilberto McGee provided financial resources and safe houses. Most disturbing were the videos. Dan had been documenting his crimes, creating a personal collection that he shared with his network of fellow predators. "Can we use this as evidence?" Craig asked. Emmanuel shook his head. "Not legally. I obtained it through illegal surveillance. But we can use it other ways." Alfred Moore's contribution was more psychological than technical. His years of experience with criminal psychology had helped Craig understand exactly what motivated Dan and his associates. "These people believe they're untouchable because they've never faced real consequences," Alfred explained. "They've insulated themselves from justice through wealth and connections, but that same insulation makes them vulnerable in other ways." Alfred had been developing profiles of each network member, identifying their individual weaknesses and pressure points. "Nelson's had a gambling problem that his wife doesn't know about. Chung's having an affair with his secretary. McGee's been embezzling from his children's charity. They're all keeping secrets that could destroy them if revealed." Craig studied the profiles, his mind working through possibilities. "So we turn them against each other." "Exactly. Right now, they're unified by mutual self-interest. But if we can make each one believe the others are going to betray them." The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than attacking the network head-on, they would create paranoia and suspicion within the group, causing it to collapse from the inside. Craig's phone buzzed with a text from Warren Young. "Meeting tonight. Usual place. Important." They met at the river overlook where they'd first discussed Craig's plan. Warren looked troubled, his usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. "We've got a problem," Warren said without preamble. "Dan knows you're investigating him." Craig's blood ran cold. "Ow! Sources I can't reveal. But he's been asking questions, making phone calls. He knows you've been digging into his past. This changed everything." If Dan was aware of Craig's investigation, it meant the network was preparing countermeasures. "What kind of questions?" "About your background, your contacts, your family's daily routines." "Craig, I think he's planning something." The implication hit Craig like a physical blow. Dan wasn't content to hide behind his network of protection anymore. He was going on the offensive. Craig drove home that night with his mind racing. As he pulled into his driveway, he noticed a strange car parked across the street. It could be nothing, a neighbor's visitor, someone lost, and checking their phone. But Craig's instincts were screaming danger. He entered the house to find Christina and Emma in the living room, watching a movie. Everything seemed normal, but Craig couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "How was your day?" Christina asked. "Fine," Craig lied. "How's Emma doing?" Their daughter had been making progress in her new therapy sessions with a doctor from the next county, someone outside Dan's sphere of influence. She was sleeping better and had started drawing pictures that didn't feature monsters or darkness. But if Dan was escalating his efforts, Emma's progress could be threatened. Craig's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Stevens," a familiar voice said when he answered. It was Dan. "I think we need to talk." Craig stepped into his home office and closed the door. "I have nothing to say to you." "Oh, I think you do. You see, I know you've been digging into my private life, making accusations, trying to turn people against me. That's harassment, Mr. Stevens. And harassment is illegal. So is child rape." Dan's laugh was cold. "Prove it." "Oh, wait, you can't. Because it didn't happen. But what has happened is that you've become obsessed with destroying an innocent man's reputation. That's defamation, Mr. Stevens. And I have very good lawyers." Craig kept his voice steady. "What do you want?" "I want you to stop. Stop investigating me. Stop spreading lies. Stop trying to poison people's minds against me. In return, I won't file criminal charges against you for harassment and stalking. And if I don't stop, then we'll see how much you really care about your family's safety." The line went dead. Craig stared at the phone, Dan's threat echoing in his mind. The man who'd raped his daughter was now threatening his family's physical safety, and Craig knew from his research that Dan had the resources and connections to make good on that threat. But instead of fear, Craig felt something else, a cold, calculating rage that settled into his bones like ice. Dan had just made his biggest mistake. He'd revealed his hand too early and given Craig the justification he needed to escalate his own plans. Craig opened his laptop and began typing a message to his team. "Game has changed. Target is now actively hostile. Moving to Phase 2 immediately. All constraints are off." Dan Woodard wanted to play hardball? Craig would show him what hardball really looked like. Chapter 5, The Trap Springs. The threatening phone call from Dan had accelerated Craig's timeline, but it also provided unexpected opportunities. If Dan was willing to make direct threats, he was getting desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. Craig's team moved into high gear. Emmanuel Christian deployed additional surveillance equipment around Dan's house and office, while Tyrone Clayton began following Dan's associates to establish their daily patterns. Alfred Moore focused on psychological warfare, developing strategies to increase paranoia within the network. But Craig's masterstroke came from an unexpected source, Dan himself. "He's planning something big," Emmanuel reported during an emergency meeting at the warehouse. "I intercepted communications about a gathering next weekend. All the major players will be there." Craig studied the intercepted messages on Emmanuel's laptop. Dan was organizing what appeared to be a social event at Judge Nelson's private estate, a party that would bring together every member of the network in one location. "It's perfect," Alfred realized. "They'll all be together, relaxed, off guard. If we're going to expose them, this is our chance." Craig was already forming a plan. "How's the security at Nelson's estate?" Tyrone consulted his reconnaissance files. "Minimal. He relies on isolation rather than protection. The property's 30 acres, gated, but not heavily monitored. Rich man's arrogance." "What about communications?" Emmanuel smiled. "I can control everything electronic within a 5-mile radius. Phone signals, internet, even their cars' GPS systems. They'll be completely cut off." The plan Craig outlined was audacious and dangerous. They would infiltrate the gathering, document everything happening there, and simultaneously feed information to law enforcement agencies outside the local network's influence. But Craig had a personal agenda that went beyond mere exposure. "I want Dan Woodard to know what it feels like to be helpless," he told his team. "I want him to experience the terror my daughter felt." The night of the party, Craig's team took their positions around Nelson's estate. Emmanuel's mobile command center was hidden in the woods, his equipment scanning all electronic communications. Tyrone had established observation posts at key points around the property. Alfred remained at the warehouse, coordinating with federal contacts who were standing by to act on whatever evidence they gathered. Craig himself would be going inside. Using Tyrone's surveillance data, Craig had identified a gap in the property's security. A service entrance used by catering staff provided access without triggering the main gate sensors. Craig had acquired a catering uniform and fake credentials that would let him move freely around the estate. The party was already in full swing when Craig arrived. The gathering appeared to be a typical social event for wealthy professionals. Expensive suits, champagne, classical music. But Craig's trained eye noticed the subtle signs that marked it as something far more sinister. There were no women present except for servers, and those servers were all young, vulnerable-looking girls who kept their eyes downcast and moved with the careful precision of people who'd been thoroughly intimidated. Craig recognized several faces from his investigation files. Judge Nelson held court near the bar, regaling listeners with stories that made them laugh too loudly. District Attorney Chung was deep in conversation with a man Craig identified as Mayor Bob Hurst, another network member they hadn't known about. And there was Dan Woodard, looking completely at ease as he chatted with men who shared his twisted appetites. Craig activated the recording equipment hidden in his catering jacket and began moving through the room, documenting faces and conversations. The casual way these men discussed their crimes was sickening. Children referred to as merchandise, families described as obstacles to be managed. But the real horror began when the party moved to Nelson's private screening room. Craig positioned himself outside the room's service entrance, his recording equipment capturing everything as the network members settled in to watch videos of their crimes. Dan's voice was clearly audible as he narrated his assault on Emma, describing her fear and pain with enthusiastic detail. Craig's hands shook with rage as he listened to these monsters discussing his daughter like she was an object for their entertainment. But he forced himself to remain calm, to gather evidence, to build the case that would destroy them all. Then something went wrong. A hand clamped down on Craig's shoulder, and he found himself face to face with Andrew Poole, a massive man he recognized from Tyrone's surveillance photos as Nelson's head of security. Lost are we? Poole's voice was deadly quiet. Craig's cover story died in his throat as Poole's grip tightened on his shoulder. The man was armed, professionally trained, and suspicious of Craig's presence in an area meant only for trusted staff. Mr. Stevens, Dan Woodard's voice came from behind him. Craig turned to see Dan standing in the screening room doorway, his trademark smile replaced by something cold and predatory. How wonderful that you could join us, though I don't recall sending you an invitation. The other network members emerged from the screening room, surrounding Craig with the casual confidence of men accustomed to being untouchable. You've been a very busy man, Judge Nelson said, his judicial robes replaced by expensive casual wear, but his authority intact. Harassment, stalking, illegal surveillance. Quite a list of charges we could file. District Attorney Chung nodded. Unfortunately, Mr. Stevens, you've trespassed on private property while conducting illegal surveillance. That makes you a criminal. Craig remained silent, his mind working through options. His team was in position. His equipment was still recording, and Emmanuel would be monitoring all communications. But he was outnumbered and outgunned, surrounded by men who'd proven they were capable of anything. The question, Dan continued, is what we do with you now. You've seen things you shouldn't have seen, heard things that could cause misunderstandings. Like the truth about what you did to my daughter. Dan's smile returned. Your daughter enjoyed our time together. She's very mature for her age. Very responsive. Craig's control finally snapped. He lunged at Dan, but Poole was ready. A single blow to Craig's kidneys dropped him to his knees, gasping in pain. Now, Nelson chided. Violence solves nothing. We're civilized men here. As Craig struggled to breathe, he heard Dan's voice close to his ear. You should have taken my advice and stopped investigating me. Now your whole family is going to pay the price for your obsession. The network members discussed Craig's fate with the detached professionalism of men planning a business meeting. They would eliminate him, of course, but they needed to be careful about the timing and method. What they didn't know was that every word was being recorded and transmitted to Emmanuel's command center, where it was being simultaneously forwarded to Joseph Burton's federal task force. Craig's apparent capture wasn't a failure of his plan. It was the final piece. Chapter 6, The Reckoning begins. As Dan's network debated Craig's fate, they remained unaware that Emmanuel Christian was monitoring their every word from his mobile command center. The surveillance equipment Craig carried wasn't just recording, it was transmitting everything in real time to multiple law enforcement agencies across 3 states. But Craig had planned for more than just evidence gathering. His apparent capture was designed to make the network feel secure, to encourage them to reveal information they'd normally keep hidden. "The federal task force knows about you," Craig told them, his voice strained from pools of salt, but his words carefully chosen. "They've been watching your network for months." Judge Nelson's expression shifted from confidence to concern. "You're bluffing." Agent Joseph Burton, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Task Force designation, Fallen Angels. Ring any bells? The reaction was immediate and telling. Several network members exchanged worried glances, and Craig knew his intelligence had hit its mark. "You're lying," Dan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Craig pressed his advantage. "Burton's been tracking your encrypted communications for 6 months. He knows about the safe houses, the financial transfers, the victim testimonies you've been suppressing." What Craig didn't mention was that Burton's investigation had been stalled by jurisdictional issues and lack of direct evidence. But the network members didn't know that, and their growing paranoia was exactly what Craig needed. District Attorney Chung was already reaching for his phone. "We need to contact our sources, find out what the feds really know." No phones. Emmanuel's voice crackled through concealed speakers Craig had helped install earlier. The network members spun around, searching for the source of the sound. "Gentlemen," Emmanuel continued, his voice echoing through Nelson's estate, "you're surrounded. All communications have been jammed. All escape routes are blocked. And everything you've said in the past hour has been recorded and transmitted to federal authorities." The panic was immediate and beautiful. Judge Nelson rushed to his landline phone, only to find it dead. Mayor Hurst tried his cell phone with the same result. Dan Woodard looked like he was about to vomit. "This is impossible," Nelson stammered. "My security systems have been compromised for weeks," Craig said, climbing slowly to his feet. Andrew Poole's grip on his shoulder had loosened as the security chief tried to process what was happening. The sound of helicopters approaching from multiple directions filled the air, followed by the unmistakable rumble of heavily armed vehicles moving up the estate's long driveway. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." A voice boomed through external speakers. "The property is surrounded. Exit the building with your hands visible." Craig smiled as he watched 20 years of careful criminal enterprise collapse in real time. But his personal satisfaction was just beginning. "There's something else you should know," he told Dan, who was staring out the window at the approaching FBI tactical teams. "All those videos you've been collecting, the ones documenting your crimes, they've been uploaded to servers around the world. By tomorrow morning, every law enforcement agency, every news organization, and every advocacy group will have copies." Dan's face went white. "That's impossible. My security was compromised the day you threatened my family," Craig finished. "Emmanuel's been inside your systems for weeks. Every file, every communication, every financial transaction, all of it documented, all of it preserved, all of it admissible in court." The front door exploded inward as FBI tactical teams entered the estate. Agent Burton's voice echoed through the house. "Everyone on the ground. Hands visible. This is a federal operation." But Craig wasn't finished with his revenge. As the network members were forced to the ground and zip-tied, Craig approached Dan with deliberate slowness. "You asked my daughter if she was scared," Craig said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Now I'm asking you the same question." Dan was trembling, his perfect composure shattered by the reality of his situation. The man who'd terrorized children was reduced to a quivering mess by the prospect of facing consequences for his actions. "Please," Dan whispered, "we can make a deal. I have information, connections. I can help you." Craig knelt down, so he was at eye level with Dan. My 8-year-old daughter showed more courage than you're showing right now. She called for help when she was scared. Who are you going to call? Agent Burton approached Craig with a mixture of professional respect and personal satisfaction. Mr. Stevens, I need you to come with us for debriefing. But I wanted you to know what we've gathered tonight will put all of these men away for life. As federal agents led the network members out in handcuffs, Craig felt a satisfaction deeper than anything his law enforcement career had ever provided. But this was only the beginning of Dan Woodard's punishment. The public exposure would be devastating, careers destroyed, families shattered, reputations obliterated. The legal proceedings would be lengthy and humiliating, with every detail of their crimes exposed in open court. But Craig had planned for more than just justice. He'd planned for complete destruction. Over the next several days, as news of the network's arrest dominated headlines, Craig's additional preparations came to fruition. Property records he manipulated ensured that civil asset forfeiture would seize everything the network members owned. Social media accounts he'd hacked began posting their criminal confessions to friends and family members. Financial records he'd obtained showed a pattern of money laundering that would trigger additional federal investigations. Dan Woodard, who'd thought himself untouchable just a week earlier, found himself facing hundreds of federal charges, civil lawsuits from dozens of victims' families, and complete social ostracism. But Craig's masterpiece was yet to come. Chapter 7: Personal Justice. The federal arrests were just the beginning of Craig's comprehensive revenge against Dan Woodard and his network. While the FBI processed the evidence and built their cases, Craig implemented the more personal aspects of his plan. 3 days after the raid on Nelson's estate, Dan was released on bond, a decision that surprised everyone except Craig, who'd been counting on it. Dan's high-powered attorneys had argued successfully that he wasn't a flight risk, given his community ties and cooperation with authorities. What they didn't know was that Craig had orchestrated Dan's release through carefully placed pressure on the federal magistrate. He wanted Dan free, because what he had planned required Dan to be in the world, experiencing every moment of his destruction. Craig had spent months studying Dan's psychology, learning his fears and weaknesses. Dan's greatest vulnerability wasn't physical. It was his desperate need to maintain control and his terror of public humiliation. Craig began with Dan's professional reputation. Using Emmanuel's hacking skills, he ensured that Dan's arrest record and criminal allegations appeared on every background check system in the country. Job applications were automatically flagged, housing applications were denied, and credit applications were rejected. Within a week, Dan lost his consulting contracts, his professional licenses, and his business relationships. The carefully constructed identity that had taken him years to build crumbled overnight. But Craig was just getting started. Tyrone Clayton's investigation had revealed that Dan maintained financial accounts under multiple identities. Using forged documents and Emmanuel's digital manipulation, Craig systematically emptied these accounts, transferring the money to victims' advocacy groups and child protection organizations. Dan's assets vanished like smoke, leaving him unable to pay for his defense attorneys, his mortgage, or even basic living expenses. The social destruction was even more thorough. Craig had identified everyone in Dan's life: co-workers, neighbors, casual acquaintances, even his barista at the local coffee shop. Each received anonymous packages containing documentation of Dan's crimes, complete with photos and video evidence. Dan's church expelled him. His gym revoked his membership. His neighbors organized petition drives to force him to move. Everywhere he went, he encountered people who knew exactly what he'd done. The psychological pressure was relentless and calculated. Craig had studied military interrogation techniques and psychological warfare tactics, adapting them for his purposes. He wanted Dan to experience the same helplessness and terror that Emma had felt. Emmanuel established digital surveillance that monitored Dan's every electronic communication. When Dan tried to reach out to former associates for help, Craig ensured those communications were intercepted and the recipients received additional evidence of Dan's guilt. When Dan attempted to find new housing, landlords received anonymous tips about his criminal history. When he applied for jobs, employers received detailed packets about his arrests. Dan was trapped in a shrinking circle of isolation and despair, exactly as Craig had intended. But the most personal element of Craig's revenge was still to come. Using Tyrone's skills, Craig had tracked down Dan's estranged father, a man named William Slaughter who'd abandoned Dan and his mother when Dan was 12 years old. William was now a retired minister living in a small town in Montana, completely unaware of his son's crimes. Craig arranged for William to receive a comprehensive package documenting Dan's activities, along with a letter from Emma describing what Dan had done to her. The package included a phone number where William could reach Craig if he wanted to discuss his son's actions. The call came 3 days later. "Mr. Stevens," William's voice was heavy with grief and shame. "I got your package. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything, Reverend Slaughter. I just thought you should know what your son became. I abandoned him when he was a boy. Maybe if I'd stayed, if I'd been a better father." Craig felt no sympathy for the old man. "Your son made his choices as an adult. He chose to hurt children. He chose to hurt my daughter. What can I do? How can I make this right?" Craig had been hoping for this question. Write him a letter. Tell him you know what he's done. Tell him you're ashamed of him. Tell him he's no longer your son. The psychological impact on Dan was devastating. The letter from his father arrived the same day Dan was evicted from his apartment for non-payment of rent. Emmanuel's surveillance captured Dan's breakdown as he read his father's words of rejection and condemnation. Craig watched the surveillance footage with cold satisfaction. Dan Woodard, who'd terrorized children with impunity, was finally experiencing consequences for his actions. But Craig's revenge wasn't finished. He'd saved the most personal element for last, a direct confrontation that would give Dan one final chance to understand exactly why his life was being destroyed. Craig arranged to meet Dan at a diner on the outskirts of town, far from any witnesses or surveillance. Dan arrived looking haggard and desperate, the polished confidence he'd once projected completely gone. "You did this," Dan said without preamble. "The arrests, the financial problems, the social ostracism. This is all you." Craig didn't deny it. "Every bit of it." "Why?" "The legal system is handling this. I'm going to prison. Isn't that enough?" Craig studied Dan's face, seeing fear and confusion where once there'd been arrogance and cruelty. "You hurt my daughter," Craig said simply. "You violated her, traumatized her, and then you threatened my family when I tried to seek justice. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" "I'm sorry," Dan said, though Craig could tell the words were calculated rather than sincere. "I know I made mistakes, but destroying my entire life won't undo what happened." "You're right," Craig agreed. "It won't undo Emma's trauma, but it will ensure you never hurt another child. And it will show Emma that her father fought for her when the system failed." Craig leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You asked Emma if she was scared when you were abusing her. For the rest of your life, every time you feel afraid, every time you feel helpless, every time you wonder if things could get worse, remember that feeling. That's what you did to my little girl." Dan's face crumpled, and for a moment Craig saw him as he really was, not a master manipulator or protected predator, but a broken man facing the consequences of his actions. Craig stood to leave, but Dan grabbed his arm. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll confess to everything, cooperate completely. Just make it stop." Craig looked down at Dan's desperate face and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "It's too late for deals. You had your chance to face justice with dignity. Now you'll face it on my terms." As Craig walked away, he knew Dan's punishment would continue long after the legal proceedings ended. The network of protection was gone, the financial resources exhausted, the social isolation complete. Dan Woodard would spend the rest of his life knowing that every loss, every humiliation, every moment of fear was payment for what he'd done to Emma Stevens. And Craig was far from finished with him. Chapter 8, The Final Trap. 6 months after the raid on Judge Nelson's estate, the federal trials were proceeding exactly as Craig had orchestrated. The network members were turning on each other with predictable desperation, each trying to negotiate better deals by providing evidence against their former associates. Judge Patrick Nelson received a 25-year sentence after his gambling debts and corruption were exposed. District Attorney Ernest Chung faced similar charges and was looking at life in prison. Mayor Bob Hurst had already pled guilty to multiple counts of conspiracy and child exploitation. But Dan Woodard remained defiant. Despite overwhelming evidence, despite the testimony of multiple victims, despite video documentation of his crimes, Dan had rejected every plea offer and insisted on going to trial. His new court-appointed attorney, his high-powered legal team having abandoned him when his funds dried up, was preparing a defense based on entrapment and prosecutorial misconduct. Craig knew exactly why Dan was fighting so hard. He still believed he could win, still thought his superior intelligence and manipulative skills could overcome the evidence against him. Craig was about to disabuse him of that notion permanently. The key to Craig's final trap had been planted months earlier, during the chaos following the arrests. Emmanuel Christian had discovered that Dan maintained a secret storage unit under a false identity, containing backup drives with evidence of crimes dating back 15 years. Instead of turning this information over to the FBI immediately, Craig had chosen to wait. He wanted Dan to feel secure in the knowledge that this evidence remained hidden, to build his defense around the assumption that the prosecutors only had what they'd seized during the raid. Dan's court-appointed attorney, Willard Carey, was competent but overwhelmed. He'd built his defense strategy around challenging the admissibility of the surveillance evidence and claiming that Dan had been entrapped by Craig's investigation. What Carey didn't know was that Craig had been feeding him information through carefully orchestrated leaks, guiding his defense strategy in exactly the direction Craig wanted it to go. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in February. Craig sat in the gallery with Christina and Emma, watching as Dan entered the courtroom in an ill-fitting suit, his face gaunt from months of stress and social isolation. Emma had requested to attend the trial, despite her therapist's concerns. At 9 years old, she'd shown remarkable resilience, and she wanted to see the man who'd hurt her face justice. "That's him, isn't it, Daddy?" she whispered as Dan took his place at the defense table. "That's him, sweetheart. But he can't hurt you anymore." The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. FBI agent Joseph Burton testified about the network's operations and the evidence gathered during their investigation. Dr. Agnes Koch provided expert testimony about Emma's trauma and recovery. But the defense's strategy became clear during opening statements. Carey was arguing that Dan had been manipulated and entrapped by Craig's investigation, that the evidence had been obtained illegally, and that his client was the victim of a vindictive father's obsession. It was exactly what Craig had expected. On the third day of testimony, Carey called his first character witness, William Slaughter, Dan's estranged father. Craig had anticipated this move and had prepared accordingly. William took the stand reluctantly, his aged hands shaking as he was sworn in. Under Carey's questioning, he testified about abandoning Dan as a child, expressing regret for his failures as a father and suggesting that those failures had contributed to Dan's psychological problems. But on cross-examination, the prosecution revealed William's recent letter to Dan, the one Craig had orchestrated, in which the old minister had disowned his son completely. "You wrote to your son that you were ashamed to share his name," the prosecutor read, "that his actions were an abomination before God and man. Do you remember writing those words?" William's face crumpled. "I was angry, upset. I didn't mean." "So you were lying then, or you're lying now?" The contradiction destroyed William's credibility and damaged Dan's defense. But Craig's masterpiece was still to come. On the fifth day of trial, as Carey prepared to rest his defense, Craig activated the final phase of his plan. Anonymous tips led police to Dan's secret storage unit. Inside, they found terabytes of video evidence documenting hundreds of crimes against dozens of children. The evidence was so extensive and damning that even Carey couldn't argue against its authenticity. But the timing of the discovery wasn't coincidental. Craig had arranged for it to be found during the trial, when Dan's defense was already committed to their strategy, too late to change course. The impact on Dan was visible to everyone in the courtroom. As the prosecutor introduced exhibit after exhibit from the storage unit, Dan's composure finally cracked completely. "This is impossible," he whispered to his attorney, loud enough for the jury to hear. That storage unit was secure. No one knew about it. Carrie tried to salvage the situation by requesting a recess, but the damage was done. The jury had heard Dan essentially confess to maintaining a secret cache of child pornography. But Craig had saved the most devastating evidence for last. Among the files in the storage unit was a detailed journal Dan had kept, documenting his crimes and his thoughts about his victims. The entries about Emma were particularly graphic and disturbing, describing her fear and pain in clinical detail while expressing Dan's satisfaction at her suffering. As the prosecutor read excerpts from the journal aloud, Emma squeezed Craig's hand tightly but didn't look away. She wanted to hear everything, to understand completely what had been done to her and why. Dan's reaction to his own words being read in court was everything Craig had hoped for. The man who'd terrorized children with calculated cruelty was reduced to sobbing wreck, begging the judge to make it stop. But there was no mercy for Dan Woodard, just as there had been no mercy for his victims. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. Dan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, to be served in a maximum security facility where his crimes would be well known to the other inmates. As the bailiff led Dan away in shackles, he looked back at Craig with a mixture of hatred and broken despair. Craig met his gaze steadily, allowing Dan to see the cold satisfaction in his eyes. Dan had learned too late that there were consequences for harming Craig Stevens' family, consequences that went far beyond anything the legal system could provide. But even as Dan began his life sentence, Craig's revenge was still not complete. Chapter 9. Justice Served. 2 years after Dan Woodard's conviction, Craig Stevens stood in his backyard watching Emma play with their new puppy. At 11 years old, she was thriving, excelling in school, making friends, and showing no signs of the trauma that had once defined her life. The physical scars had healed. The psychological ones were managed through continued therapy and the unwavering love of her family. But most importantly, Emma had seen justice serve in a way that proved to her that she mattered, that her pain mattered, and that people who hurt children would face consequences. Craig's phone buzzed with a message from Warren Young. Thought you'd want to know, Dan Woodard was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparent suicide. Craig read the message twice, then deleted it. He felt no grief for Dan's death, but no particular satisfaction either. Dan's punishment had been complete long before he'd taken his own life. The network that had protected Dan was completely destroyed. Judge Nelson had died of a heart attack 6 months into his sentence. District Attorney Chung had been murdered by another inmate who'd lost his own child to abuse. Mayor Hurst was serving his sentence in protective custody, a broken man who'd lost everything he'd ever valued. But Craig's most successful revenge had been against the system that had failed his family. Using the evidence gathered from Dan's network, Joseph Burton's federal task force had exposed corruption in dozens of jurisdictions across multiple states. Judges were removed, prosecutors were indicted, and law enforcement agencies were reformed. The case had become a model for how to investigate and prosecute organized child exploitation networks. Craig had been invited to consult with law enforcement agencies around the world, sharing the techniques he'd developed to expose and destroy predator networks. He'd turned his rage into a mission, his need for personal revenge into a systematic campaign for justice. Christina joined him on the deck, slipping her arm around his waist as they watched Emma play. "Any regrets?" she asked quietly. Craig considered the question seriously. He'd broken numerous laws, destroyed multiple lives, and abandoned every principle he'd once held about justice and due process. "No," he said finally. "None at all. The legal system had failed Emma when she needed it most. The authorities had been corrupted, the networks of protection had been too strong, and the predators had felt themselves untouchable. Craig had proven them wrong in the most permanent way possible." Emma ran up to them, the puppy trailing behind her. "Daddy, can we go to the park?" "Of course, sweetheart," Craig said, lifting his daughter in his arms. "Anything you want." As they prepared to leave, Craig reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The scared, traumatized little girl who'd called him that night 2 years ago had grown into a confident, happy child who understood that her father would always protect her. The man who'd hurt her was gone. The network that had protected him was destroyed. The system that had failed her had been reformed. Justice had been served, not the sanitized, procedural justice of courtrooms and plea bargains, but the raw, personal justice of a father protecting his child. Craig had learned that sometimes the law wasn't enough. Sometimes justice required a willingness to step outside the system, to fight on terms the predators didn't expect, to use their own weapons against them. He'd sacrificed his faith in institutions, his respect for legal procedures, and his belief in the inherent goodness of authority figures. In return, he'd gained something more valuable, the absolute certainty that he would do anything to protect his family. As they drove to the park, Emma chattering happily in the back seat about her plans for the day, Craig made a silent promise. He would continue his work exposing predator networks, continue his mission to protect children who had no one else to fight for them. Because he'd learned the most important lesson of his life. When the system fails, sometimes good people have to become dangerous people. And Craig Stevens was very, very dangerous to anyone who threatened children. The father's reckoning was complete, but his mission had just begun. Years later, when other parents found themselves betrayed by systems that promised protection but delivered only bureaucracy and failure, they would hear whispered stories about a man who'd made predators afraid, who'd turned the hunters into the hunted. They would hear about Craig Stevens, and they would know that justice, real justice, was possible, even if it came at a price that few were willing to pay. Craig had paid that price gladly, and he would pay it again without hesitation. Because some things, like a father's love for his daughter, were worth any sacrifice. And some people, like those who hurt innocent children, deserved every consequence they received. The father's reckoning was over. Justice had been served. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Mask of Mediocrity. Leo Jensen adjusted his security uniform and checked his watch. Another 12-hour shift at the gates of Riverside Industrial Complex. To anyone watching, he was just another middle-aged man grinding through life, invisible and unremarkable. The other guard called him Old Leo, the guy who kept to himself and never caused trouble. But Leo Jensen was far from ordinary. 23 years ago, he'd been Captain Leo Jensen of the Army's most classified Special Operations Unit. His unit didn't exist on paper, and their missions were buried so deep that even military historians would never find them. When the government needed someone eliminated without a trace, when they needed intelligence extracted from impossible situations, when they needed a ghost who could walk through enemy territory and emerge without a fingerprint left behind, they called Leo's team. The transition to civilian life had been Leo's choice, or so he'd told himself. After Monica Browning had gotten pregnant with Emma, he'd requested reassignment to a desk job, then eventually separation. He wanted to be a father, a husband. He wanted normal. Monica had been a nurse at the military hospital where Leo had been treated after a mission in Eastern Europe went sideways. She was beautiful, caring, and everything he thought he wanted after years of violence and shadows. They'd married quickly, and Emma had arrived 8 months later. For 22 years, Leo had played the role perfectly. The devoted husband who worked security jobs to support his family. The father who attended every school play and soccer game. The man who bit his tongue when Monica made cutting remarks about his lack of ambition in front of her friends. He'd watched his daughter grow into a reflection of her mother, beautiful, entitled, and increasingly contemptuous of the man who'd sacrificed everything for them. Emma had joined the military herself, but as an officer through college ROTC, not through the enlisted ranks like her father had originally. She made sure everyone knew the difference. Leo's phone buzzed. A text from Monica, Emma's engagement party is next week. Try to look presentable for once. Gordon will be there. Gordon Martinez, Monica's friend from the hospital where she now worked as head of nursing. Leo had known about Gordon for 8 months now. Had known about the afternoon meetings at the Riverside Motel. Had known about the late-night phone calls Monica thought he couldn't hear. Had known about the way Gordon looked at his wife like she was already his. But Leo had also known things that Monica and Gordon couldn't imagine. He'd known that patience was a weapon. He'd known that the best revenge was served when the target had the most to lose. He'd known that sometimes you had to let people think they were winning before you destroyed them completely. As Leo settled into his security booth, he opened his laptop and began typing an encrypted message to a contact he hadn't spoken to in 15 years. The message was simple. The shepherd needs his flock. Are you available for consultation? The response came back within an hour. Always ready for the shepherd. What's the target? Leo smiled for the first time in months. The shepherd, that had been his cosine during the Black Ops days. His team had been scattered across the world after their unit was officially disbanded, but the bonds forged in blood and classified missions never truly broke. 2 sheep who need to learn about wolves, he typed back. His phone rang. Monica, Leo, don't forget Emma's dress fitting is tomorrow. And please, for once in your life, try not to embarrass us. Gordon is bringing his son. He's a doctor, you know. Unlike some people who peaked in high school. I'll be there, Leo said quietly. And Leo? Emma specifically asked that you not wear that cheap suit. Maybe just this once you can make an effort? The line went dead. Leo looked at his reflection in the dark window of the security booth. Tomorrow would begin the final act of a marriage that had been over for years. And Emma's wedding would be the perfect stage for the curtain to fall. He pulled up another encrypted channel on his laptop and began typing a different kind of message. This one went to a contact in the intelligence community who owed Leo several life debts. Need a background check on Gordon Martinez, age 47, head of cardiology at Riverside General. Also need surveillance assets, 3-person team minimum. Budget is no object. Some masks were worn to hide weakness. Others were worn to hide predators. After 22 years of being underestimated, Leo Jensen was ready to show his family what they'd been living with all along. Chapter 2. The Perfect Facade. The dress fitting took place at Riverside's most expensive bridal boutique. Leo arrived exactly on time, as he always did, wearing the same blue suit he'd worn to every family function for the past 5 years. He watched through the window as Monica and Emma fussed over silk and lace, their laughter carrying through the glass. Gordon Martinez was already inside, holding court like he owned the place. He was handsome in that practiced way that successful men cultivated. Silver at his temples, expensive clothes that fit perfectly, and the kind of confident smile that said he'd never been denied anything he wanted. "Dad," Emma called out as Leo entered. "Come look at this dress. Though I suppose you wouldn't understand the difference between silk and polyester." The boutique staff laughed politely. Gordon chuckled and put his arm around Monica's waist, a gesture that Leo noted was becoming increasingly bold in public. "Actually," Leo said quietly, "I can tell the difference. That's charmeuse silk, probably about 19 mom weight." "Nice choice." Emma blinked in surprise. Monica looked annoyed that Leo had said something informed instead of embarrassing. "How do you—" Emma began. "I pay attention," Leo said simply. Gordon stepped forward, extending his hand. "Gordon Martinez. I don't think we've been properly introduced." Leo shook the man's hand, noting the soft skin of someone who'd never done physical labor, the expensive watch, the way Gordon's eyes never quite met his directly. In Leo's previous life, those were tells that marked someone as either a coward or a predator. Sometimes both. "Leo Jensen. I've heard a lot about you." "All good things, I hope," Gordon said with that practiced smile. "I'm sure they were," Leo replied, which could have meant anything at all. Monica appeared beside them, resplendent in a designer dress that cost more than Leo's monthly salary. "Gordon, you remember how I told you Leo works security? He's a gate guard at the industrial complex." There was that tone again, the one that made sure everyone understood that her husband was beneath them all. Leo had heard it so many times he'd stopped feeling the sting, but he'd never stopped cataloging each instance. Security work is important, Gordon said with the kind of condescension reserved for children and the mentally impaired. Someone has to watch the gates, right? Someone does, Leo agreed. Emma emerged from the dressing room in her wedding gown, and for a moment, Leo forgot about everything else. She was beautiful, radiant in the way brides were supposed to be. For just an instant, she looked like the little girl who used to fall asleep on his chest while he read her bedtime stories. "Oh, sweetheart," Monica breathed. "You look perfect." "Major Henry is going to lose his mind when he sees you," Gordon added. Emma beamed. "David's picking up his dress uniform today. Can you believe it? I'm going to be a major's wife." "Much better than being married to enlisted," Monica said, shooting a look at Leo. "Officers are a different class of people." Leo said nothing. He'd known plenty of officers during his military career. Some have been excellent leaders. Others have been incompetent cowards who'd hidden behind their rank while better men died following their orders. Rank meant nothing when bullets started flying. But Major David Henry wasn't one of the cowards. Leo had done his research after Emma announced the engagement. Henry had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, had been decorated for valor, and by all accounts was a good man and a good soldier. Leo actually respected his future son-in-law, which made what was coming all the more complicated. "Dad, you're being awfully quiet," Emma said. "Don't you think I look beautiful?" "You look beautiful," Leo said truthfully. "You always do." Something flickered across Emma's face, maybe surprise at the sincerity in his voice. But it was gone quickly, replaced by her usual dismissive expression. "Well, try to remember that when you're standing at the altar," she said. "I don't want you crying or making a scene. This is supposed to be elegant." "I'll remember," Leo said. The boutique owner approached with a tablet, showing Emma pictures of hairstyles. As the women crowded around the screen, Gordon sidled closer to Leo. "You know," Gordon said quietly, "Monica's mentioned that money's been tight for you guys. If you need help with the wedding expenses..." "We're fine," Leo said. "I just want Monica to be happy, you understand? She deserves the best." Leo turned to look at Gordon directly for the first time. "Yes, she does." There was something in Leo's tone that made Gordon take a small step back. For just a second, the cardiologist saw something in the gate guard's eyes that didn't fit the narrative he'd constructed. Something that looked almost dangerous. But then Leo looked away, and Gordon convinced himself he'd imagined it. As the afternoon wore on, Leo listened to his family plan a wedding he would pay for, but not be welcomed at. He listened to Gordon offer opinions about flowers and venues, as if he had every right to be involved. He listened to Emma talk about her future while dismissing her past. And he continued to plan. That evening, Leo sat in his car outside the motel, where Monica met Gordon every Tuesday and Thursday. He didn't need to see them together. He had enough evidence to destroy both their careers and reputations. But tonight wasn't about gathering intelligence. Tonight was about understanding his targets completely. Through the window of room 237, he watched his wife of 22 years betray her vows with practiced ease. He watched Gordon treat Monica like a conquest rather than a person. He watched 2 people who thought they were clever manipulating someone they considered too stupid to notice. They had no idea they were being watched by someone who'd spent years learning to kill without leaving evidence. Leo's phone vibrated. A text from his intelligence contact. Martinez clean on surface. Digging deeper. Surveillance team in position tomorrow. Another text from a different contact. Shepard. Heard you were active again. Need a nest. A nest. Safe house. Untraceable location. The kind of place where people could be taken for quiet conversations away from prying eyes. Not yet, Leo texted back. But soon. As Monica and Gordon finished their business inside the motel room, Leo started his car and drove home. He had a wedding to plan for, and everything had to be perfect. After all, you only got one chance to reveal who you really were. Chapter 3. The Wedding Day Revelation. The wedding took place at Riverside's most prestigious country club on a perfect October afternoon. Leo had paid for everything. The flowers, the catering, the band, the photographer, while listening to Monica and Emma complain about his cheap choices every step of the way. He stood at the altar in his rented tuxedo, watching Emma walk down the aisle on Gordon's arm. Monica had insisted that Gordon give her away, since he's more of a father figure anyway. Leo had agreed without argument, which had surprised everyone. Major David Henry looked magnificent in his dress blues. The young man had tried to talk to Leo several times during the engagement, but Emma and Monica had always interrupted, steering the conversation away from the embarrassing father of the bride. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly. Emma and David exchanged vows that spoke of honor, fidelity, and lifelong commitment. Leo listened to every word, thinking about the irony of his daughter pledging faithfulness while her mother's lover stood where her actual father should have been. During the reception, Leo watched his family celebrate without him. He sat at a table in the back with Monica's elderly relatives, the ones who weren't important enough to sit closer to the head table. Monica held court at the main table with Gordon beside her, both of them glowing with the satisfaction of people who thought they'd gotten away with something. Emma danced with her new husband, then with Gordon, then with a stream of young officers who all looked at Leo with polite dismissal when introductions were made. To them, he was just the gate guard who'd somehow produced this beautiful, accomplished woman. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, "it's time for our traditional father-daughter dance. However, I'm told we'll be doing something a little different tonight." The bride has asked her mentor and family friend, Dr. Gordon Martinez, to have this honor instead. The crowd applauded as Gordon led Emma to the dance floor. Leo remained seated, watching his daughter smile up at the man who was sleeping with her mother. Monica beamed from the head table, recording everything with her phone. After the dance, Emma took the microphone for her speech. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," she began, radiant in her designer gown. "Dave and I are so grateful for all your love and support. I especially want to thank my mother, who taught me that a woman should never settle for less than she deserves." Applause. Monica dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "And I want to thank Gordon Martinez, who's been like a real father to me. He's shown me what a successful man looks like, what a woman should expect from a partner." More applause. Gordon stood and bowed slightly, playing the humble hero. Emma paused, her gaze finding Leo in the back of the room. "My biological father is here too, of course. He's just a gate guard. But I suppose everyone has to come from somewhere, right?" The room erupted in laughter. Some guests turned to look at Leo with amused pity. Monica smiled and whispered something to Gordon, who chuckled and shook his head. "I mean, who would want him?" Emma continued, drunk on attention and champagne. "He's never accomplished anything, never been anywhere, never been anyone important." The laughter grew louder. Leo sat perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap. "Let's be honest," Monica called out from the head table, her own voice carrying clearly in the momentary quiet. "He's the shame of this family." The room went completely silent for a moment, then exploded in shocked laughter and gasps. Some guests looked uncomfortable with how far the mockery had gone, but most seemed to think it was all in good fun. Major David Henry stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "That's enough," he said firmly. But Emma was on a roll, feeding off the crowd's energy. "Oh, David, it's fine. Everyone knows the truth. My father is nobody special. Just Actually," Major Henry interrupted, his voice cutting through the laughter like a blade, "he's the most decorated soldier I've ever met." The room went quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Heavier. Emma blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Major Henry looked directly at Leo, and for the first time all evening, Leo looked back. There was recognition in the young officer's eyes, the kind that passed between warriors who'd walked similar paths. "Your father," David said slowly, "is Captain Leo Jensen, former commander of Task Force Reaper, Congressional Medal of Honor, Silver Star with 3 clusters, Purple Heart with 2 clusters, citation for extraordinary heroism. The man sitting in the back of this room has killed more enemies of this country than everyone in this room combined." The silence was deafening now. Emma's face had gone pale. Monica looked like she'd been slapped. "That's impossible," Gordon said, his voice cracking slightly. "He's just a security guard." Task Force Reaper was classified above my clearance level until last month, David continued, his voice growing stronger. I only found out because I was reviewing personnel files for my new assignment. Do you know what Task Force Reaper did? Nobody answered. They were ghosts. Deep insertion specialists. The men who went places that didn't exist to eliminate threats that were never supposed to be there. They saved more American lives than anyone will ever know, and they did it without any recognition or glory. David's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. Your father, Emma, is a legitimate American hero, and you just humiliated him in front of everyone who matters to you. Emma's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Monica's face had gone white. Gordon looked like he was going to be sick. Leo stood up slowly from his table in the back. Every eye in the room was on him now, but the expression on his face was completely different from what it had been all evening. The mask of the harmless gate guard was gone. In its place was something that made several of the other military officers in the room instinctively straighten their postures. Emma, Leo said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the silence. Monica, his wife and daughter, both looked at him with expressions of dawning horror. You're right about one thing, Leo continued. I'm nobody special. I'm just a man who spent the last 22 years watching his family grow to hate him for being exactly what they asked him to be. He started walking toward the head table, and people moved out of his way without conscious thought. But you're wrong about something else, he said. You think I don't know about you and Gordon, Monica? You think I don't know about the motel, the lies, the way you've been planning to leave me once Emma was settled? Monica gasped. Gordon had gone completely pale. You think I'm weak, Leo continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. You think I'm stupid. You think I'm harmless. He stopped directly in front of the head table, looking at his wife and daughter with eyes that several combat veterans in the room recognized all too well. You have no idea what I am, Leo said, but you're about to find out. Emma fainted. Monica grabbed Gordon's arm like she was drowning. Major David Henry stood at attention and saluted the man he now knew had taught him everything about being a soldier without ever saying a word. And Leo Jensen, the real Leo Jensen, smiled for the first time in 22 years. Chapter 4. The Reckoning Begins. The wedding reception collapsed like a house of cards after Emma fainted. Half the guests fled immediately, unable to process the sudden shift from cruel mockery to the revelation that they'd just witnessed a war hero being humiliated by his own family. The other half lingered, drawn by the kind of morbid fascination that attends car crashes and public executions. Leo knelt beside his unconscious daughter, checking her pulse with the efficient movements of someone trained in battlefield medicine. She was fine, just shock and too much champagne. But when Emma's eyes fluttered open and she saw her father's face inches from hers, she screamed. Get away from me, she shrieked, scrambling backward. You're scaring me. Leo stood slowly, and for the first time in years, he didn't try to make himself smaller or less threatening. The man who emerged from behind the gate guard's facade was someone who'd learned to command through presence rather than volume. David, Leo said quietly, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. Take your wife home. This conversation is between adults. Major Henry hesitated, torn between protecting his new bride and following the orders of a superior officer. The military hierarchy was deeply ingrained in him, and everything about Leo's bearing screamed command authority. Sir, with respect, Emma is my wife now. My responsibility. Leo nodded approvingly. Good answer. But Emma made her choice tonight. She chose to publicly humiliate the man who paid for this wedding, who walked away from a career most men would kill for, who spent 22 years pretending to be less than he was because his family was ashamed of what he actually was. Emma struggled to her feet, supported by David. You lied to us. You made us think you were nobody. I never lied about anything, Leo replied. I just stopped correcting your assumptions. When you called me a failure, I didn't argue. When you said I was worthless, I didn't defend myself. When you treated me like I was beneath you, I let you. Why? Monica whispered, speaking for the first time since the revelation. Leo turned to look at his wife of 22 years. Because I loved you. Both of you. And I thought that if I could just be what you wanted me to be, you might love me back. The pain in his voice was genuine, and for a moment Monica looked like she might cry. Then Gordon stepped protectively beside her, and Leo's expression hardened again. But you can't love someone you don't respect, Leo continued. And you can't respect someone you think is weak. So I became weak for you. I became ordinary for you. I became someone you could dismiss and ignore and eventually betray. Leo, Monica began. Don't. The single word cut through her attempt at explanation like a blade. Don't insult me by pretending this is news to you. I've known about Gordon for 8 months. I've known about the motel, the lies, the plans you've been making for after Emma's wedding. Gordon finally found his voice. Now, wait a minute. Leo looked at him, and whatever Gordon saw in that gaze made him step backward. Dr. Martinez, we need to talk. I don't think that's necessary, Gordon said, his voice higher than normal. I wasn't asking. The words were spoken quietly, but there was something in Leo's tone that made it clear this wasn't a request. Several of the remaining guests had phones out, recording everything. Social media would be buzzing within the hour. This is my daughter's wedding, Monica said desperately. Can't we discuss this privately? Your daughter's wedding ended when she decided to humiliate her father for the entertainment of strangers, Leo replied. What happens now is something else entirely. Emma was crying now, clinging to David's arm. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know? You weren't supposed to know what I'd done, Leo said. You were supposed to know who I was. But you never bothered to find out, did you? Neither of you ever asked me about my past, my dreams, my experiences. You just decided I was boring and worthless and left it at that. The truth of it hit Emma like a physical blow. She realized that she couldn't remember a single conversation with her father about his life before she was born. She'd never asked because she'd never thought there was anything worth knowing. I want to go home, she whispered. This is your home now, Leo said, gesturing to David. With your husband. The man who actually honored you tonight by defending your father when your own family wouldn't. David straightened. Sir, I'd like to speak with you privately when this is over. There are questions I have. I like that, Leo said. You're a good man, David. Take care of my daughter. She's going to need you in the days ahead. What's that supposed to mean? Emma demanded. Leo didn't answer. Instead, he turned to address the remaining wedding guests, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to what should have been a celebration. Those of you who wish to leave should do so now. Those of you who stay will witness something that 22 years of patience has been building toward. Most of the guests fled. Only a handful remained. A few military officers who recognized the steel in Leo's voice, some family members too stunned to move, and Monica's nursing colleagues who'd come to see the loser husband finally get his comeuppance. They were about to see something very different. Leo walked to the bar and poured himself a whiskey. He'd been sober for the entire wedding, playing the responsible father figure while his family mocked him. But that performance was over. Gordon, he said without turning around, you and I are going to have a conversation. Monica, you can join us or you can leave. But if you leave now, you don't come back. You can't threaten me, Monica said, but her voice shook. Leo turned around, and the man facing her was someone she'd never seen before. Not the submissive husband who'd tolerated her contempt for years. Not the quiet father who'd accepted his daughter's dismissal. This was the man who'd earned a Congressional Medal of Honor in places that didn't officially exist. I'm not threatening you, Leo said calmly. I'm giving you a choice. The last choice you'll get to make about how this ends. Monica looked at Gordon, who was pale and sweating despite the air conditioning. She looked at Emma, who was crying into David's shoulder. She looked at the remaining guests, who were watching her like she was a specimen under a microscope. And then she looked at her husband, really looked at him for the first time in years, and saw something that made her blood run cold. Leo Jensen was done pretending to be harmless. Chapter 5. The Trap Springs. Monica chose to stay, but not out of loyalty or love. She stayed because something in Leo's voice told her that running would only make things worse. Gordon, however, had no such insight. I don't have to listen to this, Gordon declared, pulling out his phone. Monica, we're leaving. This man is clearly unstable. Put the phone down, Gordon, Leo said without raising his voice. I'm calling security, Gordon announced, dialing. And then I'm calling the police. This is harassment, and I won't. The phone went dead in Gordon's hand. Not powered off, completely dead, as if the battery had been instantly drained. Gordon stared at it in confusion, then looked up to see Leo holding a small electronic device. Signal jammer, Leo explained calmly. Military grade. Nothing electronic works within a 50-foot radius. No phones, no cameras, no recording devices. Several guests pulled out their phones and discovered the same thing, completely dead. The comfortable assumption that this was just a domestic dispute that they could video and share online evaporated. They were trapped in whatever was about to happen. That's illegal, Gordon sputtered. Yes, it is, Leo agreed. So, is adultery in a military community? So, is alienation of affection? So, is deliberately destroying someone's reputation with false statements? He walked closer to Gordon, who backed up until he hit the wall. But we're not talking about legality anymore, are we? We're talking about consequences. Leo, please, Monica said desperately. Let's just go home and talk about this privately. We had 22 years to talk privately, Leo replied. You chose to spend that time with Gordon instead. So now we'll talk publicly. He gestured to the few remaining guests. Emma and David, 3 other military officers, 2 of Monica's nursing colleagues, and the wedding photographer who'd been too stunned to leave. Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness the end of a marriage that should have ended years ago. Monica, would you like to tell everyone when your affair with Gordon started, or should I? Monica's face went white. We never. 8 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days ago, Leo said matter-of-factly. Tuesday afternoon at the Riverside Motel. Room 237. You told me you were working a double shift. The precision of his knowledge hit Monica like a slap. How could you possibly know that? Because I followed you, Monica. Because I watched you. Because I documented everything. Leo reached into his jacket and pulled out a tablet. With a few swipes, he projected images onto the wall using a small device that had been hidden in the floral arrangements. The photos were damning. Monica and Gordon entering the motel together, kissing in the parking lot, emerging disheveled hours later. The timestamps showed dozens of meetings over the past 8 months. Emma gasped. Mom, how could you? It's not what it looks like, Monica said desperately. Really? Leo said. Then perhaps Gordon would like to explain what it does look like. Gordon was sweating profusely now. This is a violation of privacy. You can't. I can, Leo said simply. Because unlike you, I actually understand the law. Private investigator's license, issued under my real name and security clearance. Everything I've done is completely legal. You're a private investigator? Emma asked in disbelief. Among other things, Leo replied. What did you think I did for 20 years before I became a worthless gate guard? The pieces were starting to fall into place for Emma. Her father hadn't just been a soldier. He'd been someone who knew how to gather intelligence, how to plan operations, how to eliminate targets. And she was beginning to realize that she and her mother had just been classified as targets. Gordon, Leo continued, advancing on the terrified cardiologist. Would you like to tell Monica about your wife? The blood drained from Gordon's face completely. What wife? The wife you're still married to. The wife who lives in Tampa with your 2 children. The wife who thinks you're at a medical conference this weekend. Monica staggered backward like she'd been hit. What? Dr. Gordon Martinez, Leo announced to the room, is a bigamist. Has been for 3 years. His legal wife, Julia Martinez, filed a missing person report last month when Gordon disappeared for a week. Turns out he was here in Riverside, setting up his new identity. That's impossible, Monica whispered. Leo swiped the tablet again, and new images appeared on the wall. Gordon's real wedding photos. His wife and children. Public records showing his marriage license, their joint bank accounts, their shared mortgage. Surprise, Monica. The man you've been planning to leave me for is already married to someone else. Congratulations, you're the other woman twice over. Gordon made a desperate lunge for the exit, but found his way blocked by Major Henry, who had moved to the door with military precision. I don't think you're leaving just yet, David said coldly. This is kidnapping. Gordon shouted. No, Leo said calmly. This is a private gathering where everyone is free to leave at any time. But if you try to leave, Gordon, I'll have to make some phone calls. One to your wife in Tampa. One to the medical board about your falsified credentials. One to the FBI about the identity fraud. One to the IRS about the 2 sets of tax returns you've been filing. Gordon sank into a chair, defeated. Ow! How did I find out? Leo smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Gordon, I spent 20 years finding people who didn't want to be found and eliminating threats to national security. Did you really think I couldn't figure out one small-time con artist with delusions of grandeur? Emma was staring at her mother with horror. You were going to leave Dad for this man? For a criminal? I didn't know. Monica cried. No, Leo said sadly. You didn't know because you never bothered to find out. Just like you never bothered to find out who I really was. You saw what you wanted to see and made decisions based on fantasies. He turned to address the room again. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the educational portion of our evening. What happens next is more personal. The signal jammer went silent, and phones began working again. The guests who remained were free to leave, and most did, quickly and quietly, understanding that they'd witnessed something far beyond a simple domestic dispute. Only Emma, David, Monica, and Gordon remained. Now, Leo said, pouring himself another whiskey, let's discuss the future. Chapter 6, The Price of Betrayal. With the other guests gone, the country club's grand ballroom felt cavernous and cold. The wedding decorations that had seemed elegant hours earlier now looked like the remnants of a battlefield, which, Leo reflected, was exactly what they were. Emma sat in stunned silence beside David, still wearing her wedding dress, but looking like she'd aged years in the past hour. Monica huddled in a chair across from Gordon, who was slumped in defeat with his head in his hands. The way I see it, Leo began, walking slowly around the table like a predator circling wounded prey. We have several problems to solve tonight. He stopped behind Gordon's chair. First, we have a bigamist who's committed multiple felonies in the pursuit of seducing another man's wife. Gordon flinched, but didn't look up. Second, we have a woman who spent 22 years of marriage building her exit strategy while destroying her husband's relationship with his daughter. Monica's face crumpled. Leo, I never meant. And third, Leo continued, moving to stand behind Emma's chair, we have a daughter who just discovered that everything she thought she knew about her family was a lie. David spoke for the first time since the revelation. Sir, with respect, Emma was raised with the information she had. She couldn't have known what she wasn't told. Leo nodded approvingly, spoken like a true officer. Protect your people, even when they're wrong. I respect that, David. He returned to the center of the room. But the question remains, what do we do now? Do we all pretend this never happened? Do we go back to our comfortable lies and wait for the next betrayal? What do you want, Leo? Monica asked quietly. What do I want? Leo laughed, but there was no humor in it. 22 years ago, I wanted a family. I wanted someone to come home to who would be proud of what I'd accomplished instead of ashamed of what I'd sacrificed. I wanted a daughter who would know that her father was a man worth respecting. He pulled out his phone, no longer jammed, and scrolled through a series of text messages. But what I want now is justice. What kind of justice? Gordon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Leo smiled, and it was the most frightening expression anyone in the room had ever seen. The kind that fits the crime. He read from his phone. Message from Julia Martinez, Gordon's actual wife. She's been tracking you through credit card receipts. She knows about the fake medical conference. She knows about the Riverside Motel. And she's driving here tonight with her divorce attorney and a very angry FBI agent who happens to be her brother. Gordon's head snapped up. That's impossible. How would she know? Because I told her, Leo said simply. About an hour ago, right after I sent copies of all your financial records to the medical board and the IRS. You bastard, Gordon snarled, jumping to his feet. The change in Leo was instantaneous. The mild-mannered gate guard vanished completely, replaced by something that made Gordon freeze mid-step. Leo didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't make any threatening gesture. But suddenly the air in the room felt dangerous. Sit down, Leo said quietly. Gordon sat. Monica, Leo continued, his voice returning to conversational tones. I've also taken the liberty of informing your nursing supervisor about your extended lunch breaks and suspicious scheduling patterns. Apparently, having an affair on hospital time is grounds for dismissal. Monica gasped. You didn't. My career. Your career is the least of your problems, Leo interrupted. I've also filed for divorce. Papers were served to your sister this afternoon, along with copies of all the evidence. The story will be all over Riverside by tomorrow morning. Dad, Emma said shakily, this is going too far. Leo turned to look at his daughter, and for a moment his expression softened. Is it Emma? Is destroying the people who betrayed me going too far? Tell me, what would be appropriate justice for 22 years of humiliation? Emma had no answer. Here's what's going to happen, Leo announced. Gordon, you're going to walk out that door and drive straight to the police station, where you're going to confess to bigamy, identity fraud, and tax evasion. If you cooperate fully, I'll make sure Julia knows you came clean voluntarily. And if I don't, Gordon asked, then the FBI will arrest you at the airport when you try to run, Leo said matter-of-factly. I've already flagged your passport. There's nowhere you can go that I can't find you. Gordon stared at him in horror. Who are you? I'm the man whose life you tried to steal, Leo replied. The man whose wife you seduced with lies and false promises. The man whose family you helped destroy. He turned to Monica. You have a choice. You can contest the divorce and spend the next 2 years having every detail of your affair broadcast in court proceedings, or you can sign the papers quietly and disappear with whatever dignity you have left. Where am I supposed to go? Monica whispered. Anywhere but here, Leo said coldly. You burn this bridge tonight, Monica. There's no going back. Emma finally found her voice. And what about me? What about your daughter? Leo's expression grew infinitely sad. What about you, Emma? You made it clear tonight that you're ashamed of me, that you think I'm worthless, that you wish Gordon was your father instead of me. I didn't mean. Yes, you did, Leo interrupted gently. And that's your right. You're an adult, a married woman, an officer in the United States Army. You don't need a father you're embarrassed by. Tears streamed down Emma's face. I'm sorry. I didn't know. If I had known. If you had known what? That I was worth respecting? That I had accomplished things? That I had sacrificed everything I was for your happiness? Leo shook his head. Emma, I didn't need you to know what I'd done. I needed you to love me for who I was. And you couldn't do that. David stood up suddenly. Sir, with all due respect, Emma is my wife now. Whatever happens between you and her mother, she shouldn't be punished for mistakes she made based on incomplete information. Leo studied the young officer for a long moment. What are you suggesting, Major? I'm suggesting that Emma deserves a chance to know her real father, to build a relationship based on truth instead of assumptions. And if she doesn't want that chance? David looked at Emma, who was crying silently. Then that's her loss. But she should have the opportunity to choose. Leo nodded slowly. Very well. Emma, you have a choice. You can come with Monica and Gordon into whatever exile they've chosen for themselves, or you can stay and learn who your father really is. Emma looked at her mother, then at Gordon, then at her new husband. Finally, she looked at Leo with eyes that saw him clearly for the first time in years. I choose you, she whispered. I choose my real father. For the first time all evening, Leo's smile was genuine. Then we'll start over. All of us. But first, he turned back to Gordon and Monica. You have 10 minutes to leave this building before Julia Martinez arrives with the FBI. I suggest you use that time wisely. As Gordon and Monica fled into the night, Leo looked around the ruined wedding reception and felt something he hadn't experienced in 22 years. Peace. Chapter 7. The Hunter Emerges. 3 days after the wedding disaster, Leo sat in his security booth at the industrial complex, but he wasn't watching the gates. He was monitoring multiple computer screens showing surveillance feeds from across Riverside. His simple gate guard persona had been the perfect cover for activities that required anonymity and access to overlooked locations. His phone buzzed. A text from David. Sir, we need to talk. Something's wrong with Emma. Leo had been expecting this call. The psychological aftermath of having your entire worldview shattered didn't resolve itself in 3 days. He'd seen it in soldiers who discovered their commanders have been lying to them, in civilians who learned their governments have betrayed them. Where? Leo texted back. Our apartment. Emma won't leave the bedroom. Leo closed down his monitors and locked the security booth. His replacement wouldn't arrive for 6 hours, but that was someone else's problem now. He'd already submitted his resignation, effective immediately. 20 minutes later, Leo stood outside David and Emma's apartment. When David opened the door, Leo was struck by how much the young officer had aged in just 3 days. The confident soldier who'd stood up at the wedding reception looked exhausted and defeated. She won't eat, David said without preamble. Won't talk. Just stares at the wall and cries. I don't know how to help her. Leo nodded. Post-traumatic stress. She's processing the collapse of everything she thought was real. Where is she? Bedroom. She won't see anyone. I've tried calling in sick for her, but she's supposed to report to her new assignment next week. Leo walked through the apartment, noting the wedding gifts still in boxes, the flowers already wilting. It looked like a life interrupted, which was exactly what it was. He knocked on the bedroom door. Emma, it's your father. Go away, came the muffled reply. I'm coming in. Leo opened the door to find Emma curled up on the bed in pajamas, surrounded by tissues, and looking like she hadn't slept since the wedding. She looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. I ruined everything, she whispered. Leo sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in years, Emma didn't flinch away from him. No, you didn't. You made mistakes based on information you were given by people you trusted. I humiliated you in front of everyone. I called you worthless. I said nobody would want you. Yes, you did. Emma flinched at his blunt confirmation. How can you forgive me? Because you're my daughter, Leo said simply. And because I understand how it happened. Your mother spent 22 years teaching you that I was a failure, that I was something to be ashamed of. You believed what you were told by the person who was supposed to protect you. But I should have known better. I should have asked. I should have. Should have what? Interrogated your own mother about whether she was lying to you about your father. Leo shook his head. Emma, you were a child when this started. Children believe what their parents tell them. And then you became an adult, and the patterns were already set. Emma sat up slowly. Tell me about Task Force Reaper. Leo was quiet for a long moment. Most of it is still classified. What I can tell you is that we went places where American soldiers weren't supposed to be and did things that never officially happened. Did you kill people? Yes. A lot of people. Enough. Emma studied her father's face. Do you regret it? I regret the necessity of it, Leo said carefully. But no, I don't regret protecting my country and my fellow soldiers. I don't regret stopping people who would have killed innocent Americans if they'd been allowed to succeed. Why did you leave? Why didn't you stay in the military? Leo smiled sadly. Because your mother was pregnant, and I wanted to be a father more than I wanted to be a soldier. I thought I could have both, but the military doesn't work that way. Not for special operations. So you gave it all up. For us. For the family I thought we could be. Emma was crying again, but this time it wasn't from self-pity. I wasted it. I wasted your sacrifice. I threw it away because I was ashamed of you. No, Leo said firmly. You didn't waste anything. You became an officer. You married a good man. You built a life. The fact that you didn't appreciate where you came from doesn't diminish what you accomplished. But I hurt you. For years, I hurt you. Leo reached out and took his daughter's hand. Emma, do you want to know the truth? It did hurt. Every dismissive comment, every eye roll, every time you acted embarrassed to be my daughter, it cut deep. But it never made me stop loving you. Ow! Because love isn't conditional on being appreciated. Love is choosing to care about someone even when they don't care about you back. Emma squeezed his hand. I want to know you. The real you. I want to understand who my father actually is. That's going to take time, and it's going to be difficult. The man I really am isn't the gentle, harmless person you grew up with. I'm harder than that. More dangerous than that. Show me, Emma said. Leo studied her face. Are you sure? Once you see who I really am, you can't unsee it. I'm sure. Leo stood up. Get dressed. Combat fatigues if you have them. We're going to the range. An hour later, Leo and Emma stood at a private shooting range 30 miles outside Riverside. Leo had changed out of his security uniform and into black tactical gear that made him look like a completely different person. Emma watched in amazement as her father assembled a sniper rifle with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd done it thousands of times. His hands moved without conscious thought, muscle memory guiding each motion. Remington 700, Leo said as he worked. Modified for long-range precision. Not military issue, but close enough. How far can you shoot with that? Accurately? About 1,000 yards in good conditions. Emma swallowed hard. Have you ever with people? Yes. Leo finished assembling the rifle and handed Emma a smaller weapon, a standard military sidearm. Let's see what you remember from officer training. For the next 2 hours, Leo put Emma through shooting drills that pushed her skills far beyond anything she'd learned in the military. He moved like liquid violence, transitioning between positions and weapons with deadly grace. Again, he said after Emma missed a difficult shot. Feel the trigger break. Don't jerk it, caress it. Emma tried again and hit the target dead center. Better. Again. By the end of the session, Emma was shooting at a level that would have impressed her military instructors. But more importantly, she was beginning to understand what her father was. This is what you did? She asked as they packed up the weapons. You were a sniper? Among other things. Sniper, infiltration specialist, close quarters combat expert, intelligence operative. I was trained to be a complete weapon. Emma looked at her father with new eyes. And you gave all this up to work security jobs? I gave it up to be your father, Leo corrected. But Emma, you need to understand something. I never stopped being what I was trained to be. I just put that part of myself away. Until now. Until now. As they drove back toward town, Emma was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. What happened to Mom and Gordon? Gordon turned himself in to the FBI yesterday. He's looking at federal charges for bigamy and fraud. His real wife filed for divorce and is seeking full custody of their children. And Mom, Monica moved in with her sister in Phoenix. She signed the divorce papers without contesting them. Emma nodded. Do you think there's any chance you might forgive her someday? Leo was quiet for a moment. Emma, your mother didn't just betray our marriage. She spent 22 years systematically destroying my relationship with you. She taught you to be ashamed of me, to see me as worthless, to wish I was someone else. But if she apologized, some things can't be apologized away, Leo said firmly. Some betrayals cut too deep. Some damage is permanent. Emma absorbed this. And me? Can you forgive me? Leo reached over and squeezed her hand. You don't need my forgiveness, Emma. You need to forgive yourself. And then you need to decide who you want to be moving forward. I want to be your daughter, Emma said quietly. Your real daughter, not the version Mom created. Then that's who you'll be. As they pulled into David and Emma's apartment complex, Leo's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he hadn't seen in 15 years. Shepard, said a voice from his past. We have a problem. Leo's expression hardened. What kind of problem? The kind that requires old skills. Can you talk? Leo looked at Emma, who was watching him with curious eyes. I'll call you back in 10 minutes. After he hung up, Emma asked, Is everything okay? I don't know yet, Leo replied. But Emma, you wanted to know who your father really is. You might be about to find out more than you bargained for. Chapter 8. Ghost from the Past. Leo called back his former teammate from the parking lot of Emma's apartment building. The voice that answered belonged to Carrie Graves, who'd been Task Force Reaper's communications specialist and Leo's closest friend during their operational years. Carrie, it's been a long time, Leo said. Not long enough, Shepard. Listen, we have a situation. 3 of our old team members are dead. Leo felt ice form in his stomach. Ow! Professional hits. Made it look like accidents, but I know the signatures. Someone's hunting us, Leo. Someone who knows our real identities. Who else is left? You, me, Dave Atkins, and Lance Sweeney. That's it out of the original 8-man team. Leo did the math quickly. Half their unit was dead, killed by someone who knew intimate details about classified operations that were supposed to be buried forever. Where are you now? Leo asked. Safe house in Montana. Dave and Lance are here with me. We need to meet, Leo. Whoever's doing this won't stop until we're all dead. Why now? It's been 15 years since the unit was disbanded. That's what we need to figure out. Can you get here? Leo looked up at the apartment building where his daughter was trying to rebuild her life with her new husband. It's complicated. I have family now. I know about the wedding, Carrie said. Saw the video online. Congratulations on finally taking the mask off. You saw that. Half the internet saw it. War hero reveals truth at daughter's wedding has been trending for 3 days, which might be why someone's targeting us now. The implications hit Leo like a sledgehammer. By revealing his true identity publicly, he might have exposed not just himself, but his entire former unit to whoever was hunting them. Shit, Leo muttered. Yeah, can you get here or not? Leo looked up at the apartment again, then made his decision. Give me the address. I'll be there tomorrow. Leo, come armed. And watch your back. Whoever this is, they're good. After hanging up, Leo sat in his car for a long moment, weighing his options. He could ignore Carrie's call, stay in Riverside, and hope that whoever was hunting his former teammates wouldn't find him. But that would mean living in hiding again, and he was done with hiding. More importantly, it would mean putting Emma and David in danger if the hunters did find him. Leo went back upstairs to find Emma and David waiting for him in the living room. They could tell from his expression that something serious was happening. I have to go away for a while, Leo said without preamble. How long? Emma asked. I don't know. Could be a few days, could be longer. David leaned forward. Sir, is this military business? Leo considered how much to tell them. Former military business. Some people I used to work with are in trouble. They need my help. What kind of trouble? Emma pressed. The kind where people end up dead. Emma and David exchanged glances. Dad, that sounds dangerous. It is dangerous, Leo admitted, which is why I need you both to be very careful while I'm gone. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't trust strangers. If anything feels wrong, call me immediately. You think we might be in danger? David asked. I think I might have made us all targets when I revealed who I really was at the wedding, Leo said honestly. I'm hoping I'm wrong, but I need to find out for sure. Emma stood up suddenly. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. Dad, I'm a military officer. I'm trained for this. You're trained for conventional military operations, Leo corrected. This is something else entirely. This is the kind of work that doesn't appear in any manual or training program. Then teach me, Emma said stubbornly. Leo looked at his daughter, really looked at her. 3 days ago, she'd been a spoiled young woman who thought her father was worthless. Now she was volunteering to walk into danger to help him. The transformation was remarkable. Emma, you're not ready for this. And I won't risk losing you after I just got you back. And I won't risk losing you after I just found out who you really are, Emma shot back. David cleared his throat. Sir, if I may suggest a compromise, what if Emma and I relocated temporarily while you handle this situation? Somewhere secure, out of the way, but where we could provide backup if needed. Leo considered this. It would get them out of immediate danger while keeping them close enough to help if things went badly. There's a safe house about 50 miles from where I need to go, he said finally. Military-grade security, completely off the grid. You could stay there while I deal with this. And if you need us? Emma asked. I'll call. Within hours, Leo had made arrangements for Emma and David to be transported to a secure facility in Montana while he drove separately to meet with his surviving teammates. As he packed his gear, weapons and equipment he hadn't touched in years, Leo felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with preparing for combat. The gate guard was gone forever. The man who emerged from that chrysalis was someone far more dangerous. Leo's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We know who you are now, Shepard. We know where you live. We know about your family. Come alone, or they die too. Leo stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Who is this? The response came immediately. Someone you should have killed when you had a chance. Leo's blood ran cold. The message could only mean one thing. Someone from his past operations had survived. Someone who'd spent years planning revenge against the team that had destroyed their organization. He quickly called Carrie back. Change of plans. I'm being hunted too. Someone just threatened my family. Jesus, Leo. Any idea who? Someone we left alive who shouldn't have been left alive. That's a long list. Yeah, but whoever it is, they just made a mistake. What mistake? Leo checked his weapons one final time, his voice dropping to the deadly calm tone that his enemies had learned to fear. They threatened my daughter. Chapter 9. The Shepherd's Return. The Montana safe house was a fortress disguised as a hunting lodge, built into the side of a mountain with sight lines for miles in every direction. Leo arrived after a 15-hour drive to find Carrie Graves, Dave Atkins, and Lance Sweeney waiting for him with enough weapons to equip a small army. "Shepherd," Carrie said, embracing his former commander. "Good to see you, even under these circumstances." Leo looked around at his surviving teammates. They'd all changed in the 15 years since Task Force Reaper disbanded, but the essential core of each man remained. These were people he'd trusted with his life in the world's most dangerous places. "Bring me up to speed," Leo said. Dave Atkins, their former explosives expert, pulled out a tablet showing surveillance footage. Marcus Webb, killed in a car accident in Denver 3 weeks ago. Brake lines cut, but the local police wrote it off as mechanical failure. Owen Compton, heart attack in his sleep in Chicago 2 weeks ago, Lance added. Except the coroner found microscopic puncture wounds consistent with poison injection. And Kirk Bruce, hiking accident in Colorado last week, Carrie finished. Fell off a cliff that he'd climbed dozens of times before. No witnesses, no explanation. Leo studied the photos of his dead teammates. Professional work. Whoever's doing this knows our capabilities and our weaknesses. "There's more," Carrie said grimly. "Each of them received the same message before they died. Same as the one you got about your family. Someone we should have killed when we had the chance," Leo repeated. "Any ideas?" "Too many," Dave said. "We took down a lot of organizations over the years. Could be anyone who survived and held a grudge." Leo's phone rang. "Emma." "Dad, we're secure at the location you sent us to. But David's been analyzing the threat message you received. He thinks he recognizes the phrasing. Put him on speaker." David's voice came through clearly. "Sir, the phrase 'when you had the chance' is specific military terminology. It suggests someone with formal training, possibly special operations background." "That doesn't narrow it down much," Lance said. "Actually, it does," Leo said slowly. "How many operations did we conduct where we had targets we chose not to eliminate?" The room went quiet as the four men thought back through their classified missions. "The Bratva operation in Romania," Carrie said finally. "We were ordered to extract the arms dealer, not kill him. And the cartel infiltration in Colombia," Dave added. "We could have eliminated their leadership, but intelligence wanted them alive for interrogation. But the one that always bothered me," Lance said quietly, "was Budapest." Leo's face hardened. Alejandro Thomas. The name hung in the air like a curse. Alejandro Thomas had been a rogue CIA operative selling classified information to the highest bidders. Task Force Reaper had been sent to eliminate him. But when they'd cornered Thomas in a Budapest safe house, they discovered he had hostages, 3 American aid workers. Leo had made the tactical decision to let Thomas escape rather than risk civilian casualties. It had been the right moral choice, but it had haunted him for years. Thomas had access to classified personnel files, Carrie said. He could have identified all of us. And he had the training to plan and execute assassinations, Dave added. Leo's phone buzzed with another text. "Remember Budapest? Shepherd? Remember the choice you made? Now you get to make another one. Come to the place where it all began, where your daughter learns what it feels like to fall from a great height." "That's him," Leo said grimly. "Thomas is in Budapest, and he has surveillance on Emma." "How is that possible?" Carrie asked. "She's in a secure facility." Leo was already moving toward his gear. "Because Thomas was CIA. He knows about our safe houses. He's been planning this for 15 years. So what's the play?" Lance asked. "You 3 stay here and coordinate with the security team protecting Emma and David. I'm going to Budapest." "The hell you are," Carrie said. "We go together or not at all. This is my family he's threatening. And we're your team," Dave said firmly. "Task Force Reaper doesn't leave anyone behind." Leo looked at his 3 surviving teammates and felt a surge of gratitude that he hadn't experienced in years. These men were willing to walk back into hell with him, just like old times. "All right," he said, "but we do this right. No cowboy shit, no unnecessary risks." We go in fast, clean, and quiet. Thomas dies, and we all come home. Just like Budapest, Carrie said, except this time we finish the job. Just like Budapest, Leo agreed. Except this time I don't choose mercy. 12 hours later, Task Force Reaper was wheels up on a private jet bound for Hungary. Leo stared out the window as they crossed the Atlantic, thinking about the young CIA operative he'd spared 15 years ago and the monster that mercy had created. Some mistakes took decades to correct. But Leo Jensen, the real Leo Jensen, the shepherd, the man who'd earned a Congressional Medal of Honor in places that didn't officially exist, was finally going to set things right. The gate guard was dead. The ghost was returning to finish what he'd started. And this time, there would be no mercy for anyone who threatened his family. As the plane banked toward European airspace, Leo checked his weapons one final time and smiled. Alejandro Thomas thought he was hunting a man who'd grown soft in civilian life. He was about to discover that some predators never lost their edge, they just learned to hide it better. Epilogue. New beginnings. 6 months later, Leo Jensen stood in the kitchen of his new house, a modest 2-story home with excellent sight lines and multiple exit routes, chosen with the tactical awareness that would never fully leave him. The official report stated that Alejandro Thomas had died in a gas explosion at his Budapest safe house, along with 3 unidentified associates. There was no mention of Task Force Reaper. Emma knocked on the door and entered without waiting for permission, a habit she developed since Leo had returned from Europe. She wore civilian clothes now. She'd resigned her commission to take a position with a private security firm that specialized in protecting corporate executives with government contracts. "Morning, Dad," she said, kissing his cheek as she poured herself coffee. "David's running late. He had an early briefing at the base." "How's married life treating you?" Leo asked. "Better now that I'm not ashamed of my father," Emma replied with a smile. "David says he's learned more about real tactics from our weekend training sessions than he did in 4 years of officer training." Leo nodded approvingly. Over the past 6 months, he'd been teaching Emma and David skills that weren't covered in any military manual. They'd both proven to be excellent students. "Speaking of training," Emma said, Carrie called. "He wants to know if you're interested in that consulting contract." After Budapest, Leo's former teammates had started a private military consulting firm. They offered services to governments and corporations that needed problems solved quietly and efficiently. It was lucrative work, though not always legal. "I'm considering it," Leo said, "but only on a part-time basis. I want to be available for my family." Emma smiled. "Your real family. My real family." The divorce for Monica had been finalized 3 months earlier. She'd taken nothing except her personal belongings and had disappeared into her new life in Phoenix. Leo had heard through mutual acquaintances that she was working at a small clinic and living alone in a studio apartment. He felt no satisfaction in her downfall, but he felt no sympathy either. Gordon Martinez had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for bigamy, fraud, and identity theft. His actual wife had moved to another state with their children and changed their names. Leo never thought about Gordon at all. "Dad," Emma said carefully, "there's something I want to ask you." "Ask." "Do you ever regret it? Giving up your military career to try to be a normal father?" Leo considered the question seriously. "I regret the years we lost. I regret that it took a public humiliation for you to see who I really was. But I don't regret trying to give you a normal childhood. Even though it didn't work." "It did work, Emma. You became a strong, intelligent, capable woman. The fact that you were ungrateful for a while doesn't diminish what you accomplished." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I love you, Dad. The real you." "I love you too." Leo's phone buzzed. A text from Carrie. "New contract. High-value target in Eastern Europe." Interested, Leo looked at his daughter, who was reading the message over his shoulder. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think," Emma said slowly, "that the world needs people like you. People who can do the things that others can't or won't do, even if those things are illegal." "Especially if they're illegal," Emma said firmly. "Some problems can't be solved through official channels." Leo smiled and typed back to Carrie, "Send me the details." As Emma headed out to meet David for lunch, Leo walked to his study and opened a secure filing cabinet. Inside were mementos from his years with Task Force Reaper, photos, commendations, and mission reports that officially didn't exist. But at the front of the collection was something new, a photo from Emma's second wedding reception. Not the elaborate country club disaster, but the small, intimate ceremony